Hello everyone. Welcome to another couching session by MSD Animal Health. And my name is Stephan von Berg, and I'm happy to be here today with Professor John McGlone from the Texas Tech University. And he is one of the world's most renowned specialists on animal welfare. So, welcome John. Thank you for being with us. And first of all, who are you? Introduce yourself.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And I am a professor of animal science at Texas Tech University. I've been in this field for over 40 years. I'm an old man, been around and have worked on many issues of animal welfare, especially in pigs. But I do work with some other species too, but mostly pigs.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the pig for sure is one of the most interesting species to work on.
Of course it is. Yes.
In that difference of the commercial need for keeping pigs when we do it, and the need of the animal. And when we look at that from this perspective, and we all know the definition of animal welfare, the 5 freedoms, etc.
Yes.
But what is your take on that? What are your, and you've been talking about the experience and the scientific work, what is animal welfare specifically in pigs for you?
Okay, that's a great question. And it's a question I often get, even in social settings.
Mm-hmm.
But we have first of all, my perspective is usually about where we should be going, not where we are. Because where we are, I think we've gotten off track in animal welfare. I think that we've fallen into the area of animal welfare and we've become a reactive industry instead of taking control of the issue and leading the consumer and others in the right, correct direction. And it starts off, my philosophy today starts off with the idea that we shouldn't even be talking about animal welfare. And the reason is because nobody can define it. Okay, so when I was at a meeting in the 1990s where a group of people got 100 scientist activists together for a 3-day meeting in a secluded place, and they said, we're going to define animal welfare. And at the end of the 3 days with 100 experts, we couldn't do it. People have different views of it. Your view of animal welfare might be different than my view. So how do we manage this situation? So when you're dealing with a word like two words like animal welfare, for which different people have different definitions, and there is no agreed upon definition, then how can you even say we're making improvements in animal welfare? You can't. So I'm trying to change the conversation. In fact, one of the suggestions I make, again, I'm talking about the future, not today, is that we should stop talking about animal welfare. But what shall we talk about, right? I mean, you can't not talk about the topic. And what really resonates with consumers and scientists, fundamentally I'm a scientist that deals with hard science to try and show something conclusively one way or the other. What we cannot measure welfare directly, although I've tried many times, many ways. But we can measure behavior. And we can manage behavior. And fundamentally, what the consumer and the farmers want is they want to be able to meet the behavioral needs of the animal. And I believe our message as an industry should be not, when the consumer or somebody asks you, are you managing the welfare of the animal? You say, you don't answer by saying, no, we don't talk about welfare. You don't say that. You say, we accommodate all of the behavioral needs of the pig that we know about. We accommodate those needs. We understand when the need for temperature is not appropriate, like it's too cold or too hot, the pig changes its behavior. We need to get it back into the normal range so that we're managing the behavior, including not just, you think of behavior, you think of, well, fighting and feeding and drinking. It's more than that. Every disease that an animal gets is a behavioral problem. It starts by the animal acquiring a pathogen through its behavior, through breathing, through touching, rooting, whatever. It acquires it through behavior. After the animal is sick, we're managing its behavior. We're managing the symptoms, right? We're managing the behavior. So both the input and the output of disease is a behavioral problem. Take nutrition. Nutrition is a behavioral problem. The animal has to eat something. We try and understand how they eat and what they eat, and we manage both the nutrition to meet the behavioral need of the animal. If you fed the pig something that it didn't like, it wouldn't eat it. If you fed it the wrong nutrient composition, it would change its behavior and its physiology also.
They do, yes.
So every aspect, temperature, health, nutrition, breeding is certainly a behavioral problem. They're all, and we're managing the animal's behavior without thinking about it. Husbandry skills that people have, like we say, well, this person is a great husbandry person. He knows how to care for the pigs. Well, what does he really know? What he really knows is how the pig behaves, and he knows how to manage it. We are managing the behavior. So if we tell people, we use the latest science to accommodate the behavioral needs of the pig, and people say, well, we make sure that they don't get sick. We make sure that they have the right food. We make sure that their behavior, if abnormal behaviors arise, that we address them. If we sense something is out of compliance in terms of the requirements of the pig, it will show you through its behavior. And people are measuring that right now, objectively. That's the other thing about behavior. It's different than, it's really not different than other things. You'll be probably surprised to learn that I can measure behavior more accurately than a hormone.
I am not surprised because I've done work in that in that
So when a pig is chewing, you are pretty close to 100% sure that it's chewing. But when you run a cortisol assay or a testosterone assay, there's a certain amount of variation. You're plus or minus 10% if you have a really good assay.
And in this, taking the sample is also something that alters the result itself already. So that's really a problem. But what I would like to maybe dive a bit deeper on is one core issue that you mentioned, and I find it very interesting, is that people cannot agree on a definition. People cannot agree what is welfare. And what I see in many discussions is that we have this gap between perceived emotional welfare and scientific welfare.
Yes, that's right.
And as you said, as a scientific person, and myself as well, we want to look at the facts and want to make what really benefits the pig and what the data shows is a benefit. But then we have the outside of that wants to feel good about. How do you think this can be addressed?
Well, first of all, you have to realize that you can objectively measure welfare, in quotes, let's say of a sow in a gestation crate versus a group pen. And I've written literature reviews about this and summarized the literature, and there is really no significant difference in cortisol levels, in the immune system. It's not suppressed for a sow in a crate. There's no physiological difference. The only difference really between a sow in a crate and a sow in a group pen is that the sow in a crate cannot fully socially interact with other sows. That is a behavioral, it's not a behavioral need, that's a behavioral want for the pig. So
interesting.
Yes, and this is a key differentiating point that the chicken industry has taken advantage of. So if you go to, let me back up. We'll come back to the chickens in a minute. I think that we should not have any legislation on animal welfare anywhere in the world. I think that we should let the consumer decide what they want and what they're willing to pay for. So if you take if you say, all right, commodity pork, the pork that everybody produces, that pork we meet all of the behavioral needs of the animal. And that should be our message as an industry. We meet all of the behavioral needs of the animal, and if we discover a new behavioral need, we'll meet that. Mm. But the behavioral wants of the animal, the consumer has to pay for. And so if you want the sows outdoors, it's going to cost more money. You have to pay for that. If you want the sows not in a crate but in a group pen, it's going to cost the farmer more. You're giving the animal the behavioral want, so the consumer should pay a little more for that. Every issue can be broken down in this. And so if you go to the grocery store, I'm sure it's the same in Europe, but certainly in the US, and you look at the eggs, you can buy white eggs that are from battery cage. It doesn't say battery cage, but and they were in the US, I looked before I came on this trip, $1.89 a dozen for eggs that are white eggs. Then you can buy cage-free eggs, and you can buy organic eggs that are cage-free, and you can buy organic eggs that are outdoor raised chickens. And the outdoor raised chicken, organic outdoor raised chicken eggs were $11 a dozen instead of $1 a dozen, instead of $2 a dozen. So that differentiation from really they're providing different behavioral wants for the animal. The animal wants to be outside, well, it wants to peck on the ground, right? And it's more enriching for the chicken to peck on grass than on concrete, solid concrete. It'll still try, but it's not so rewarding. Yeah. So it wants to peck in the grass and look for bugs and stuff. So if it wants that and doesn't need it, it's not going to suffer if it doesn't have it. It just wants it. Then and you give the animal what it wants, the consumer can differentiate the product. Yeah. So if we did that for all of the animal commodities and said, okay, some consumers want this, some consumers want that, we'll provide them the range of product and let them pay for the behavioral wants that you're providing the animal. Yeah. And that way the marketplace will figure out, because there's a serious problem with adding cost to animal products for poor people. So for sure. Yeah. Actually, animal welfare laws in Europe hurt, and there's no animal welfare laws in the United States. So the animal welfare laws in Europe are negative for the poor people. And the poor people maybe don't care about behavioral needs that much. Behavioral wants that much. They care about, they want the behavioral needs met of the animal. They want the animal to have a normal physiology and so on. But they maybe would rather feed their children eggs, which are high in protein, or pork, which is high in protein, if it was reasonably priced. And if they won the lottery and had a lot of money, maybe they would start buying the organic eggs. But so what we're doing when we add cost to the system and no choice for the consumer, we're hurting poor people. So it's a socioeconomic hardship on people when you force them by legislation to follow certain laws. So in this regard, Europe is hurting poor people. Now, more than that, the European Union is trying to promote their animal welfare policies around the world. They're trying to add cost to the production of pork in Brazil by having Brazil adhere to European standards, that if they did that throughout the whole country, it would hurt the poor people in Brazil. They would not be able to afford high quality protein. And is that really what we want?
I don't think so. No, and it really nicely shows I would say, the dilemma and the disconnect.
Yes.
And what you said, and we've seen that also in several studies on the human side, that people are very vocal about animal welfare. Let's keep it in that terminology. Yes. But there's a huge disconnect at what people say at the polls and how they vote in the grocery store.
That's right, exactly right. That's been demonstrated over and over again with pork and poultry products.
Yeah. And so Yeah, it's true, but this is the problem that we are facing, right?
Yes.
And if I understood you right, and please correct me if I'm wrong, your approach would be to have no legislation on welfare.
No legislation.
Really roll that back. If I'm from Europe, right? Like,
it's impossible to roll it back in Europe. I think, but that would be the goal. Yes.
Yeah, and then give the option. Now, one of the problems that I see here is if you have a farm that wants to do that want to go for the behavioral wants of the animal, there's an investment to make.
Yes.
And a huge uncertainty if this investment will be reimbursed.
But it should be.
It should be, but if we then learn that the population is not willing to pay.
If I buy a car and I want satellite radio in it, I pay extra for it.
No, that's true.
Right? I mean, if I want more than the standard, I pay for it.
Yeah.
And it should be the same with food. And when you give people a choice, then it begins to sort out in the grocery store, like the grocery stores in the US, it's sorting out. The chicken industry became proactive early on, and they said, okay, you don't want eggs from chickens in cages? We'll produce you eggs from chickens in not cages, in group housing, and a floor raised or out, whatever. But you have to pay for it. And so the pork industry hasn't done that. The pork industry has fought the activists head on, and they've lost every time. Every time
because they are on an emotional weaker point. Right.
But it's a marketplace that we're talking about, and the marketplace can sort it out. And so let's just imagine 10 years from now that everybody adopted my point of view, and they said, okay, legislation is on pause, and you would see in the grocery store the segregation of different types of eggs. You would see that in pork and beef and other animal products and milk, and then the consumer would, let's say 5% of the people buy the $11 eggs and 10% of them buy cage-free and whatever percent, and 70% of them buy the white eggs. Now people are buying both what they can afford economically and where their sensibilities lie in terms of what they want to provide to the animal. So maybe a poor person would buy eggs that are cage-free, that are $3 a dozen instead of $2 a dozen, but they're not going to pay the $11 for the organic eggs.
Going outdoors.
Because they don't value that as much as just getting them out of the cage. And we don't do that with pork. Now we do it to some extent in the U.S. There's some grocery stores that sell pork, from outdoor pigs and so on, and you can order it online. But it's not the way the majority of meat in the grocery store or restaurants are made. Now, in restaurants, you got the same thing. You go to a restaurant in some cities and they say, this is free-range pork from Berkshire pigs that are tasty and blah, 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 and you pay extra, and that pork chop costs more than at the family restaurant down the street where they're serving regular pork chop. Yeah. But you're making that choice.
Yeah, but then again, and this is now a bit from my experience as a veterinarian, as a pig veterinarian, and taking this example in pork, free range does not, in my opinion, automatically mean it is better or higher animal welfare. If you count in, for example, health issues that are bigger in free range pigs.
Now,
and that's a challenge.
You probably haven't dug deep enough in my resume to know that I did a lot of work on what we call outdoor pigs. We didn't call them free range. Indoor versus outdoor pigs. I probably published more than anybody. I looked at every aspect, what grasses they eat, how they affect the soil, how they affect the health of the animals, how they affect all these things. And we solved almost all the problems except one we couldn't solve. The outdoor pigs are continually inoculated in the U.S. with salmonella. And occasionally they're inoculated with influenza, avian influenza. And so the outdoor pigs, we tried as hard, to meet the behavioral need of an outdoor pig, you have to have a wallow. And you have to have water, and you have to have food.
Yep.
And the birds come, the resident birds from the area come, and they poop on the feed and in the water, and the water is, we started a study with salmonella-free pigs and put them indoors and outdoors, and in 30 days, all the outdoor pigs were infected. And we tried everything we could think of. We sanitized the water, but it was continuous inoculation by the wildlife. And what's worse, diseases like PED traveled by migrating birds.
Yeah.
And it obviously negatively affected the welfare of the pig because they got sick, right? The outdoor pig. And so if you want to, you just imagine what people would think if anybody ever studied coronavirus and whether wildlife, because we know that birds carry not just influenza, but other things. And then of course you got the rodents too, and all the other wildlife. You got the African swine fever in Germany in the wild pigs, and it's very difficult to keep that pathogen away from outdoor pigs. So for the sake of human health and pig health, it's really not a sustainable model to have the pigs outdoors.
I agree.
From the perspective of human and animal health. So I tried, and people will continue to try, but again, it could be that some consumers want that, no matter that there's a human health risk, and so they should be paying a lot more for that. Because in a perfect world, those farms would be tested continuously for salmonella and influenza at least, and when they became positive, the pork not put in the market, right? So, yeah, it's a great idea to put them outdoors, but there's a tremendous risk.
Yeah, I agree. Now, from your perspective, and it's a very, very consistent logic, argumentation, and point that you make, that we should not talk about welfare, we talk about behavior and then different levels.
Behavioral needs and behavioral wants.
And behavioral wants, exactly. But to be honest, welfare legislation will not go away.
It won't go away, no.
Now, and I think from what you already said, I have an idea, but maybe if you can condense it in a, let's say, action plan for the industry. How do you think the swine industry, maybe worldwide, should change its behavior? You said they were fighting the activists and they lost.
Yes.
So that is not a way to a sustainable way.
No.
What could be the sustainable way?
I think that first of all, when you, back to the eggs for a moment, when you look at the eggs from caged chickens up to organic, it doesn't say anything about welfare of the animals on those labels. People are not buying them because you said the welfare is better for a free-range chicken than a caged chicken. You're saying that they're free range, they're outdoor.
Outside.
That's all you're saying. Yeah. You're not saying better welfare. And when you do say better welfare, then you get sued because you can't define it and you can't justify saying that.
But isn't the better welfare label in the mind of the consumer?
Yes. So we have to change the mind of the consumer from thinking of, I mean, they're going to talk about welfare, right? Animal welfare. But we need to answer them with, we are meeting all of the needs of the animals, and if you want us to also meet the animals' wants, we have product for you for that as well. There's another thing about international animal welfare that's important. Not every culture views animals the same way.
Important point.
Okay, so in Asia, they have a different attitude towards pigs than they do in Europe. When we force somebody from another country to adopt the ethical principles of our, let's say I'm from Europe. I am Irish by descent, but okay. Let's say I'm from Europe and I'm trying to force another country to adopt my ethical principles that goes against their ethical principles. Or maybe they don't have any, they don't care about it. Maybe it's only that. Or maybe they do care, but they have a different view. We're forcing them to change their own culture. And that is a form of colonialism. We did the same thing.
Yeah.
By we, I mean Europeans, many countries, forced other countries, other natives of other continents, to adopt our religious views and our political views and so on.
Moral fluid.
And now we know that that was wrong. But we're doing it now with animal welfare. We're saying, we think our ethical view is better than yours, and you need to adopt our ethical view. That is neo-colonialism. They're not doing it with guns, they're doing it with money.
With money, yeah.
And that is wrong also. So as soon as and I've written about this a little bit, and the European Union has been quiet about it because they realize that what they did centuries ago was morally wrong. Kidnapping people and making them slaves, making them Christian, making them whatever, blah, blah, making them like them instead of letting their culture develop. And so when we do that in Asia and Latin America, it's also wrong. And so if they get called out on this, the European Union and others, other activist groups, I mean, I've talked to activists about it. I said, really? You want to change? They said, well, there's so many pigs in China, we need to get them to adopt animal welfare rules. Why don't you ask the Chinese what they believe their relationship is with the animals and let them have a culturally appropriate relationship with the animals? That's what you should do, not force them to adopt your ethical principles. As you can see, I'm passionate about this.
Yeah, I mean, and with full right to it, and it's interesting. And what this discussion shows me is that you start at a seemingly pretty clear starting point, animal welfare, and it ends up with socioeconomic questions, and it ends up with cultural questions. So the topic itself is much bigger than it looks like. So we are looking at the tip of the iceberg when we look at the pig in the crate.
That's right.
So that's really an interesting takeaway. And for the swine industry, I think what we are looking for, or what could help, is being proactive.
Yes,
about
I agree.
Yeah.
So the first step for being proactive is to give the consumer, not the activists, give the consumer the range of products that they want and clearly label them. This is from pigs that were not castrated. You know, this is from this, and it costs more. If you castrate them, well, generally it's economically better than if you don't castrate them. But if you don't castrate them, you can market them at a lighter weight and reduce the boar taint, but that's an economic problem for the farmer and the plant, the packing plant. And so, but if people are willing to pay for it, sure, leave the testicles on and you can have it. You can, if you want it, you can have it. So if the industry would present their product with different levels of behavioral needs and wants, all the behavioral needs are met, but different levels of behavioral wants, then the consumer can decide. And if the consumer wants all organic outdoor pigs, okay, fine, but I don't think they will, because they'll understand when you explain it to them that there's a risk to human health if you do that. And so the first step is for the industry to acknowledge that there's not one consumer. There are many gradations of interest in animal welfare and behavioral needs and wants.
And there may be people that you cannot reach and address by any means because they are on an extreme part of the spectrum.
Right.
But do they make the majority of the consumer base? Probably not. Yeah, for sure not.
But you know, even if you take, I've had conversations with Peter Singer, the philosopher, the animal rights philosopher, and not just him, but people that believe in a certain kind of utilitarian view of meeting animals' wants and needs. He has said that if all of the behavioral needs and wants were met of the animal, all of them, and the animal lived a happy, healthy life, and they were killed instantaneously, and they didn't know they were going to be killed. And he said, then it might be an acceptable product. But that's not the way it is. And so he and other philosophers and activists, he's more of a philosopher than an activist, but they think, well, if I'm not going to eat it anyway, why do I care how they raise it, right? But they do care, and they want to change your behavior. Again, another morally negative position from my perspective. If I have a certain philosophical view, I'm allowed to have that. But for me to impose that on you is wrong, in my view.
That's, again, very, very interesting and gives a lot of food for thought, definitely. And starting at the tip of the iceberg, ending in philosophy.
It's the very tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
But of course, there are many specific animal welfare questions about everything we do in pork production. Something as simple as giving an injection to an animal with a needle. A little bit of pain, a lot of risk for an abscess forming or a needle breaking. So the industry looks for alternatives. Okay, we're not really doing it for the welfare. We're saying we don't want needles in our meat, right? Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
Certainly the consumer doesn't. So we need to find alternatives that improve the behavioral needs and wants of the animal, and in a way that's acceptable to the consumer, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you went to a consumer on any issue and said, is this particular practice okay with you? You know what their first question is? I didn't know they did that on the farm.
Yeah, for sure. Because there's this disconnect.
So disconnected from the farm.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
The general population doesn't know how animals are raised, any species. Now, a few people do, but most people don't know. So they have to be led. They're led by the industry who are leading them to express their opinion about what they like the eggs. The poultry industry has really forced or allowed the consumer to express their view of what they want. And so, okay, vegans are not going to buy eggs at all, but somebody else is going to buy organic, and somebody else, and so it works out for everybody.
Yeah. No, that's great, and it's the viewpoints that you bring to the table are very fascinating, and I enjoyed talking with you about that.
Nice to talk to you.
Really looking forward to your talk at the event here. And yeah, again, thanks for sharing with us. And this concludes this coaching sessions, or this coaching session by MSD Animal Health. Thank you for watching, and be sure to be around for the next episode. And thank you. Goodbye.